teachers? Is the Gen Alpha can't read, write, or do math, etc. crisis real? If so, how bad is it? I'm a high school teacher, specifically AP and regular level physics. Been at it for 15 years now. I'm not teaching Alpha yet, but I'm starting to wrap up the last parts of Z. My perspective is interesting because I'm still interacting with the top kids of each group, but also each level of kids all the way down at the bottom. The very top kids are about the same as they ever were, and potentially even more impressive than before. More access to technology and resources have done wonders. My biggest worry for this group is that college admissions are now completely broken, and they don't always get into great colleges. The run-of-the-mill AP and honors kids have sort of gotten worse, but not by that much. COVID hit them in the fundamentals, cheating is more rampant because of how easy it is, and culturally there's less pride in overachieving, so it doesn't happen as often. These kids are perfectly content doing the bare minimum and seem to lack internal true motivation. However, the run-of-the-mill non-honors kids have gotten really bad. Very low tolerance for working hard, very short attention span, very short stamina for active listening. This is the brain-rotted/fried dopamine group. Blame the screens, the social media, and the parenting for this one. It's the group that is the most worrying because a decade ago, I'd estimate maybe 10 to 20% of kids at a school are like this. Now, it's probably 40 to 50% of each graduating class. This is not the group that viral TikToks are talking about with being illiterate and not able to do math, but it's the group I'm most concerned with. When I hear about the Gen Z stare and the general inability for minimum wage workers to do their jobs, I immediately recognize that it's the same kids in this category, just a few years older, and they still haven't made any progress. They don't care. They're afraid to look like they care. They seem depressed as a cultural baseline. They're super socially awkward, and they don't seem to feel the need to change any of this. They can do basic math, but they're far below what kids in this category were able to do 10 years ago. They can read, but their comprehension and analysis of it is low. They can write, but their writing is filled with errors and their thoughts seem incoherent or simple. Then there's the bottom 10 to 20% kids, excluding the special ed or severe/moderate learning disability kids. This is what the viral videos are about, and it's not an exaggeration. They can't read, write, or do very basic math like multiplication or division at 17 years old. When they read, it's obvious they're just looking at some of the letters and then guessing, and it's obvious they're not processing any of it when they say the words out loud. They write like first graders at the age of 17. If they have to add even basic numbers together, they're still using their fingers. They seem to actively think school is stupid and they're not the problem at all. These kids existed 10 years ago, but there weren't that many kids. In a class of 40, maybe 1 or 2. Now it's like 4 to 6 kids in each class. Now, I'm at a good school, top 10% type of school in an affluent state, serving a moderately affluent suburban community. I believe the teachers who are teaching the inner city/rural communities where their entire class can't read, write, or do math. I don't think they're exaggerating. Those kids do exist, and it seems that it's been a constant trend in my entire career that it's heading in this direction. Alright, look, I am technically Gen Z. I'm not saying I'm young, I'm a little past my prime. You know, I'm getting to the point where I can say stuff like, back in my day. When I go to play the Pokemon card game at locals, some people call me Unk. That's just how it is. But even as someone in Gen Z, this is terrifying. Because in my school, I definitely didn't notice this. To be fair, a bit of an exception. I did go to a private school. Obviously, when you have to pay to go there, people are going to be a little pickier. They want their kids to work a little harder, obviously. But even from my friends at public school, I never heard about stuff this bad. Definitely never about someone who just couldn't read or write, who is about to graduate. This is going to be a very concerning thread, I fear, and one that is going to make me feel infinitely older. Next story. I've been teaching high school English for nearly a decade. It's bad. I go home and cry nearly on a weekly basis. Granted, I work in the toughest, poorest high school in 100 miles, but it shouldn't be like it is. This is the first year the majority of my class cheated on their first essays. I had to go back to timed paper and pencil essays for the rest of the year. It still took most of them 5 full class periods to write 5 paragraphs on an article we analyzed together with multiple scaffolds. I gave them sentence frames for their thesis, and they were allowed to use a notebook we made together that shows how each paragraph should be structured sentence by sentence. Even with those tools, it took most of my 10th graders 5 full days to write 5 paragraphs. I still had a kid crash out and tell me I didn't give them enough time. I still had 25 5% of the overall class not past the final. It was also the first year a kid yelled, "We don't care about your freaking books, miss," while I was in front of the class presenting books they might be interested in for their book reviews. Even the most capable and most bright students sidestepped my attempts to get them to read anything at all. Almost all of them cheated on the book review they had to write. It was a major grade and I just dropped it from the grade book. I tried to get very honest with them about what all of this is going to mean for their future, but when I did, I was reported to my boss for the first time ever by a group of kids. I had to go in and explain that I'd given them a quote about literacy for them to write about and I had to bring all the receipts. I got into teaching because while I was a big reader as a kid, I hated school. I wanted to help kids and be someone in the school system who empowers children rather than enjoys having power over children. There are plenty of those kinds of folks in school too. I wanted to be one of the good ones. But right now, my job is the most difficult part of my life. I don't know if I can do this until retirement. Our school has experienced waves of cuts. We don't have enough custodians, we don't have enough bus drivers, and we don't have enough security. I have to stand out in the halls and tell kids to put their phones away and get to class every day during my prep period. And every day I get told to go screw myself multiple times. There are no consequences and there are no real expectations that kids have any academic discipline or stamina. I think unless we get rid of all screens, the one-to-one Chromebooks, the phones, we are going to lose an entire generation of people who will live Wall-E style. Seriously, I can't stress enough how damaged these kids are, and they don't know it because they don't have anything to compare it to. No one but school staff sees it because we're the ones dealing with the entire collective of young people day in and day out. They don't even bother to get to know their teachers' names. They are that buried into their phones all the time. They don't bother to get to know their classmates. 90% of the student body doesn't go to football games or dances or prom. The social aspects of school have been almost entirely gutted by online culture. Even at assemblies, they mostly ignore what's going on in favor of staring at their screens. As a society, we need to grow some balls and regulate it, and definitely regulate AI, or we may seriously lose the country for good. We simply won't have informed voters who know how to stave off political or financial propaganda. The more I write here, the more upset I feel. I need to go unplug and stand in my garden for a while. I don't know if this is a hot take nowadays, but I don't think we should get rid of all screens. I think screens are much less of a problem than the controlling of them, I guess. Like, it's actually valuable to learn how to regulate yourself when there is something addictive or, just dopamine inducing in front of you that you have access to all the time. Learning that self-control for your own good will help you in all sorts of aspects of life. Like, we're talking if you ever start drinking at all, ever start gambling, any vices, and spending too. But with no consequences, we are going to breed the generation of people who simply won't stop themselves from doing anything. And that's scary. Anyway, while I do understand what OP is saying, the whole no screens thing I don't entirely agree with. Screens are pretty good for some things, but they do need to be regulated. A bunch of kids can't just be on their phones during assemblies. Surely there's a way to stop that. Next story. Not a teacher, but it is worth noting the larger overall literacy crisis in America, which is getting worse with each younger generation. It's important to realize it's about comprehension more than decoding. Decoding is being able to look at letters and know what they are and what words they create. It's knowing what a written word is and being able to write words. This is what most people think of as literacy, just the ability to look at a sheet of paper and say the words that are on it and be told words and put them onto paper. But the ability to actually understand what those words mean, and especially understand what they mean on a deeper level and imply information from it, is also part of comprehension, and that's the part that is severely lacking. Next story. Elementary principal here. It is bad. Parts of the issues. For the last 5 years, the only teachers I've been able to hire were those barely in a teaching program. It's a challenging job even with the degree, but it's damn near impossible without the education OR experience. They've been skipping their student teaching due to this. Bright side, this year was a high turnover year, and all the teachers I've hired are fully licensed and with experience. I'm in a more rural area, but I've lived in various states across the US and hear similar issues in those states as well. Parents. We are no longer professionals in their minds. I'll call home, explain the investigation I've conducted and the conclusion. Nope, not my kid. He would never. Ma'am, I have him on video and with 3 witnesses. They will hold them out of school to avoid in-school suspension, take them for ice cream for standing up to a bully, They think that every kid that looks at their kid wrong is a bully. Now, bullies still exist, and it's challenging to deal with those situations as an administrator, but they aren't all bullies, I promise. Sometimes it's just a kid who's mean to everyone, and I'm trying my best to get a handle on it. Laws. In special education, there are so many laws our hands are tied in. We're stuck in most, if not all, cases. Sometimes kids hit, bite, kick, and sometimes that is towards adults. We have to put hands on kids to keep us safe and others safe. In Oregon, if you screw that up, it's considered child abuse. Yes, I get it, they're children. And some of those children headbutt, kick, spit, threaten, pull hair, climb walls, turn over furniture, and hey, if I screw it up, I'm suddenly an educator with a founded case of child abuse on my record. Who wants a career-ending risk like that hanging over them? And also, there are a ton of crazy teachers out there who should never put hands on kids. I get it. Society. School is no longer school. It's the only way some of our parents can work. It's become daycare. We really need more universal supports like pre-K for all, which would help prepare students for school, as well as help parents not have to afford an entire mortgage payment for daycare. I would share more, but my cortisol levels have been high for 220 days because it's summer break, so I'm going to zone out a bit longer. Next story. I'm a kindergarten and first grade teacher. I constantly tell parents that the best thing they can do for early literacy is to read to/with their kids every night and have real conversations with their child. Ask them questions, get them to think about the world and how things work. Then I'll have parents clearly blow that off and ask me if I can just print them some worksheets for their kids to do. So you just want your kid occupied and out of your hair. Got it. I won't be doing that. Read with your kid and talk to your kid. Next story. Depends where you teach. I went from a low-income school where most students were 2 to 3 grade levels behind to a private school last year. My students are all reading and writing at a high school level in 6th grade. The difference, in my opinion, is education level of the parents, which is also tied into socioeconomic factors. Parents have more time, flexible jobs, paid time off to spend with their children, as well as access to extracurricular activities. It's an unacceptable inequality to me. The parents of the students at my old school don't love their kids any less. The cards are stacked against them. Next story. I worked in a library for a few years. The high schoolers would come in with "My teacher said I can use any book for the project," and just stare at me. I'd ask them what they like to read. They say they don't. I ask if they like any show or a movie, and they'd name one. Here would be the conversation. Okay, so you've watched Fantasy Show through like 20 times. Do you like fantasy? What's fantasy? Like magic, elves, creatures. What does that have to do with the show? Literally the entire show. Like, the main character does magic constantly and is friends with magical creatures. Oh, I didn't know that. What do you know about it? I thought you watched it. Yeah, I've watched it on streaming like 20 times. Okay, how about I just get you a book similar to it? Why? So you enjoy it because you like the story. I do? You've watched it 20 times! Next story. As a teacher of 13 years in middle school reading/language arts, short answer is yes. A lot of things have gone into this, not just COVID. Kids aren't forced to read to alleviate boredom or learn like previous generations. Smartphones and tablets from a young age have eroded attention spans and boredom tolerance. I can't compete with TikTok or YouTube and shouldn't be expected to. Parents can't or don't want to be involved in their kids' education. Don't value it because they got picked on/weren't smart, but turned out okay/teachers are indoctrinating kids. All of the standards/skills that used to be in 2nd grade have been pushed into K. K is no longer socialization and fine motor skills with phonics exposure. It's expecting them to be full reading by mid-year, which isn't developmentally appropriate. Until a few years ago, elementary wasn't teaching phonics, so kids don't have tools to decode unfamiliar words, and they definitely don't care enough to look it up. Things we did regularly, like weekly vocab-themed units, have gone away entirely. If you took a middle/high-level reading test, you might not pass. The reading snippets sometimes require background knowledge students might not have. I don't always agree with the answers, and I have a master's. Curriculum is usually written by one of the major publishers, is absolutely crap that everyone hates, but has to be followed due to state mandates for, quote, high-quality materials of instruction. Novels are usually only used in advanced classes in favor of articles 1,000 snippets. It used to be we'd have several sections of honors/advanced classes. Now we're lucky to fill 2 sections in a grade level. We have kids in high school working on phonics, and they just get passed along through middle school because of metrics and some old study in the name of equity. I'm sure there's more, but it's summer, and this post is destroying my pool time. Next story. My son is in kindergarten and was having issues sounding out words. The issue was that he couldn't sound out words at all. Show him a word and he would guess a different word that didn't even start with the same letter. Turned out they weren't teaching the kids phonics, they were just doing sight words, so the kids only knew the words on their lists. They called in some high-paid expert who said, "Yeah, kids need phonics," and they changed it, but the school has been open for 3 years. I feel bad for the kids who had that foundation for 1 to 3 years already. My son went from being below level to above level in reading. Next story. Teacher for the last 15 years. Taught in a Title I school for a decade and a fancy suburban school for the last 5 years. It's not a Gen Alpha crisis, it's a poverty crisis. It's just much easier to blame kids and iPads than the systematic problems that got us here. Teaching in my high poverty school, all of the statements in this thread were true. High schoolers could barely read or do math. I regularly had 17-year-olds who had never read a chapter book in their entire lives. Teaching 45 minutes away in a fancy suburban school, my students are all high-scoring, thoughtful, and emotionally well-rounded. When you don't grow up with both parents working 70 hours a week and minimum wage and constant threats to your housing, food insecurity, and violence, turns out you're great at school. We burned down the middle class, shifted the entire tax burden of education onto property taxes, and gave huge tax cuts to businesses that used to pay for them. Then we blame iPads for why kids can't read. This is 100% true, I think. I definitely think we are misdiagnosing the issue with kids. As I said before, I don't think screens are necessarily the problem. Now, screens can be a problem for some kids. I think I was one of them, to be fair. Playing games constantly on the computer from the age of 7 probably fried a lot of receptors in my brain that would have been better left untouched. But I think in moderation, everything can be fine. And we've heard in other points in this thread that if the parents are in a better socioeconomic status, they can spend more time with their kids, and that just helps development a lot more. If parents constantly have to be working, of course the kid is not going to get the guidance they need. Of course they're going to be unsupervised and left to do whatever they want, and whatever they want is going to be the quick fixes. It's the hit of dopamine you get every time you scroll to a new video, you know? Not to toot our own horn, but Undersparked is kind of doing a service. These are long videos. Hopefully we're keeping attention spans nice and healthy. Alright, anyway, moving on. Next story. 6th grade math teacher here in a state that does not fund public education well. Yep, the problem is real. Parents are the biggest culprit in this problem. Most families have 2 earners, which means their child was in a daycare or with a relative, which likely did very little to advance their education. It's likely they were simply put on a screen to stare at for hours on end with a little socialization and even less learning. They came into kinder less ready to learn at a time when we were asking kinder students to do things well beyond what is developmentally appropriate. Worse, they care more about their dance or soccer competition than their education. Parents will gladly spend an entire weekend on travel dance, but not 5 minutes to read or do schoolwork. Hell, the number of girls I have seen being pulled on a weekly basis for dance has risen exponentially in recent years. There are no behavior expectations at home and no support for teachers. How can we keep them focused and behaving in a way that contributes to learning when they go home to a mess of a situation each and every night? And this part is tough to say, but it's the truth. Many educated, intelligent adults are choosing not to have children, or have far less of them. The parents of many school-age children were never students who cared themselves, and now they're raising children who similarly don't care or invest in education, or value intelligence. 2, AI doesn't help. It has basically rendered homework irrelevant. Every child pretty much has access to a built-in cheat code at home. No more critical thought necessary. The answers are a click away. 3, education is driven by testing, which is driven by corporate entities that simply pay their way to have influence and control over the process. Teachers are basically tunneled into using certain materials the same way without any real control over how to best deliver materials. It's corporate rot at the very core. 4, students have no stamina or work ethic. This traces back to the first point. There is no expectation for them to be responsible at home, to clean up after themselves, to persevere through a problem. Everything is done for them, and they have no desire to better themselves themselves. It's rough. As a parent as well, I work extra hard to make sure my children are not what I experience in the classroom. Next story. I teach high school from freshmen to seniors. Obviously, it depends from kid to kid, but as a general trend, it's pretty bad. Even just getting them to read a set of directions can be like pulling teeth. What do I do next? What did you just do? Describes step 4. Alright then, what does step 5 say? I don't know. Well, read it. They try and read it. I still don't get it. God forbid I ask them to read a section of a textbook or an article longer than 2 paragraphs. Even with guiding questions, it's a real struggle for them. Similarly, but not nearly as talked about, I've noticed a trend as a science teacher that kids have no spatial skills as well. Like I'm asking 18-year-olds to make a free-swinging pendulum, and it takes them 2 hours to figure it out. I don't necessarily want to just tell them how, because the struggle is their brains actually starting to learn these skills. I ask 15 to 16-year-olds to make a ramp for a ball, giving them boxes and cardboard, and it's a big struggle. Young children aren't playing with or building with blocks or toys they hold in their hands. Many things that you used to have to open or close yourself are automatized, doors to buildings, vans, etc., and it's stunting their ability to not only visualize things and problem solve in a 3D manner, but instinctually understand things like momentum and forces. For example, when a sliding door didn't close all the way, they don't have the instinct to push it faster. They just keep pushing it, confused why it won't close. Next story. Soon to be retired teacher here. It's more than just a crisis. It's an existential crisis right now. Kids with a level of self-entitlement that is beyond measure. Parents who A, think their kids can do no wrong and feed into that self-entitlement, B, are too busy just trying to survive today's economy that they're working multiple jobs to keep kids fed and housed that they don't have time to monitor their kids. C, parents who should have never had kids in the first place for a variety of reasons. Building administration that's terrified of the superintendent in charge, so they'll cook the books to make it seem like nothing is wrong. Superintendents who only care about test scores so they can keep their extremely cushy jobs, and politicians who think they know better than the actual frontline teachers who are in the trenches day in and day out, coming down with ridiculous mandates or laws that are practically unenforceable but hold us accountable to them anyway with a threat to our careers if we don't follow their bullcrap. All the while, everything is our freaking faults. And for all you jerks out there that will respond about having summers off, etc., the vast majority of us go to get summer jobs because A, don't get paid through summer vacation, and B, we don't make enough to save enough to get through the summer without working because of the economy and just how much everything freaking costs, especially nowadays. Let's not talk about all the unpaid overtime we do because we don't get enough freaking time to take care of it during the day because of all the bull crap listed above. You ever see the documentary Idiocracy starring Luke Wilson? Yup, we're heading there faster than it took me to type this out, and it seems like most of the USA is happy that it's going to happen. It's a shame because there are really great kids out there that deserve so much better than to be stuck in a classroom full of kids that are walking, talking cases for retroactive abortion. So yes, unless the USA pulls their collective heads out of their butts and actually starts to value what teachers try and do on a daily basis, this country's well and truly screwed. I almost lost it at the end there. OP went crazy. I tried to give even a fraction of OP's actual emotion into that, so I hope the vibe came through at least. I did my best to do it justice. Next story. Every teacher I know tells me kids have no basic concept of right or wrong and no respect for authority. Like a kid will just sit on their desk with their phone out and the teacher will tell them to put it away and the kid will be like, why? Not in an edgy contrarian way, but in a genuine, I don't understand why way. And they just don't listen to teachers. And when the teachers speak to the parents either go full Karen, you don't tell my kid what to do, or they basically admit they don't listen to them either, and they're just out of control. This is in stark contrast with just a few years ago when teachers and parents were generally a united front, and kids listened to them, or at the very least understood why something was wrong, even if they didn't care for it. Next story. I teach pre-K, 4.5 to 5-year-olds getting ready for kindergarten, and I'm genuinely worried for my current group of kids. To give an example, the other day we were doing an open-ended craft where they had to make trees out of materials. One boy looked at me and asked how to do the craft. I told him to use his imagination. He then looks me in the eyes and goes, how do I do that? I've also realized that a lot of these kids don't know how to handle boredom or how to play by themselves. So it's not just an academic thing, it's a social, emotional thing as well. Next story. Having a Gen Alpha kid, I can definitely say the issue is real. We think it's to do with how the learning process has changed so much from when we were little. The kids aren't taught to memorize their basic math tables, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, which is the foundation for all the other math concepts. I remember having to make our own flashcards in elementary as part of the learning so that for an entire school year we were focused on a particular math type. After seeing my youngest's school lessons over the years, the curriculum tries to cover all the maths at once, introducing algebra and other concepts, so unfortunately the basics are glossed over instead of being focused on, and all of the other subjects are all over the place too. My school system had vocabulary all the way up through high school with a new word and definition list every week and a quiz on Friday. We learned the parts of speech, how to diagram sentences, synonyms, homonyms, and all that. I had an in-law who was a teacher and a darn good one at that, but she was talking to me about the learning program they were introducing, and it was more about keeping the kids' interest than really filling their minds with information. I understand wanting to keep the kids focused, but for some stuff you just have to sit down and write stuff out multiple times and ways instead of having dance time. I will also add that the teachers are also burdened with the administrative side of things, always having to be focused on numbers instead of being able to relax and work with each of their kids. Since the administration pressures the teachers to keep test scores up and to pass every kid, the teachers tend to just do what they can to make that happen. Again, forcing them to artificially bump a kid up when they're not actually ready. Next story. I'm not a teacher, but I do have a job in government working with a lot of young kids. It's bad. Exceptionally bad. I've had a 12-year-old kid come to swim that walked up to the desk with a phone and just handed the phone to me because they don't understand how to pay for admission and assume the phone would do it for them. I've had a 16-year-old dump 8 $1 bills onto my desk because he couldn't count to 3 to pay for a $3 admission. I've had a 14-year-old that injured his ankle, need to sign an incident report, and asked me how to, quote, draw the letter A because they forgot how to spell Matt, his own name. I've witnessed numerous teens not being able to read "the pool is closed on X/Y" with the date, and they didn't understand how to interpret the numbers, let alone know that a 4 would represent April. It's crazy bad. Next story. As a Gen Z, I imagine this is a case of everyone in high school and under rather than only Gen Alpha, currently in high school, it definitely has gotten worse. I'm taking the best stream in all of my classes, and it's bad. We spent a week on basic grammar in grade 11. Underline the verb, highlight the adjective, circle the noun, etc. It didn't feel this bad even last year, but the change is drastic and crazy. This year, I've explained North America to someone who also mispronounced cancer, watched someone play Roblox during their own presentation, and put time and effort into work that most of my classmates did with AI, and then was barely given 5% more because, oh yeah, our teacher uses AI too. I try. I focus on forcing myself away from screens, but then again, I'm here right now, aren't I? I've never used AI for assignments because I know that once I start, it'll only get harder to stop. I try to pretend the work matters and ignore the fear I have that nothing will pay off because university is so expensive and there are so few jobs in the world. It's hard not to be apathetic, and once you're apathetic, everything kind of just sucks you in. The difference is also basic skills. Basic typing without having to look at every key and typing each letter one by one. I didn't even know that being able to type without watching the keyboard was unusual until this year. I can read a clock and most of my classmates can't. Researching without Wikipedia or ChatGPT, I'm sure there are more that I'm just not aware of because it's normalized for me. We're not all stupider, it's just that the stupider people are getting worse and the rest of us are getting dragged down with them. Now, I'm gonna go read a book. Now, although OP's post is a little bit, I'm not like the other kids, I also still fully believe most of what they're saying. Being someone who actually kind of cares about what you're doing in school and being surrounded by people who don't is probably an unsettling experience. I wouldn't be surprised if OP has had the thought of, am I doing this wrong? Like more than once. AI in general frightens me to exist in schools. Nothing, I think, could be more poisonous for the mind than generative AI for school projects. How horrific that a child can type a prompt into a system and get a result that at least resembles a finished product. That's a good way to absolutely annihilate any work ethic they could ever develop. Next story. Yeah, it's rough. This is year 20. I'm going to throw a lot of the blame at society's willingness to throw devices at kids. When I started teaching, few kids had cell phones and nothing was smart. Kids read books for fun. I asked all my classes the last 2 years I teach high school, when was the last time you read a book for fun? Many of them look at me as if I've asked them, when did you pet a dinosaur? Most kids can't remember when they've read a book of their own choosing. The few that could, it was 5th or 6th grade. Next story. 2 real issues. NCLB screwed up schools for the past 25 years, getting worse every year because of a national requirement to show numbers look better or threaten funding with the no money to fund improvement. Second was a trend towards a non-phonic form of reading education that basically trains reading whole words via context clues, basically blowing up the whole value of phonetic writing system, as there are kids who basically have to memorize as if English words are Chinese characters. This wasn't universal, but a bunch of the literacy issues not traceable to socioeconomic conditions have their roots here. Next story. Education has been slowly stripped away since 2000, from salaries of educators to school resources to just the classes available. I had woodshop and art and music and cooking and sex ed and more. I'd bet my left nut that you can't find a public school that offers all that now. The government doesn't think education is important because dumb people are easier to control and don't complain as much. Teachers should make as much money as doctors, and schools should be amazing and held to high standards with the newest books and theories and text. We have enough money to do so, but no, better spend that money on tax breaks and incentives for major corporations, or buying oil or whatever the hell. This country is freaking disgusting. Next story. I'm not a teacher, but I work with college/grad school aged interns. Part of my job is editing/reviewing research memos they write. I want to be clear that I'm describing most but not all of them with what I'm about to say. When they're not submitting work entirely generated by AI and riddled with falsehoods or exaggerations of truth, making it useless, they're submitting pages of sentence fragments, misused words, and writing that is absent of or uses incorrect punctuation. They don't know how to use an apostrophe correctly to denote possession versus plurality. They don't explain statements or thoughts. They just state them without context and move on. We expect these research projects to take a minimum of 2 weeks, but we'll frequently get them back within 24 hours. Since they're often using AI to come up with work that requires human discernment to get right, they don't know what they've written about, so the editing process is a nightmare. I ask them follow-up questions, develop an idea or statement in their writing, and they come back asking what I meant. They also don't take feedback, as in, I'll throw on track changes and put comments in the margins, and then they'll return the next draft with about 50% of what I said or changed included, including basic grammar/vocabulary edits. It frequently takes 6 to 8 drafts/rounds of edits. Oftentimes, I even sit down with them and go through line by line to get something usable. The Gen Z/Gen Alpha stare is also very real. I'll be talking through their work with them or answering a question they had, and they'll just stare at me. No verbal or physical cues of understanding, interest, confusion, etc. Just staring like they're waiting for me to do something. It seems that even in a real-world scenario of applying their knowledge and skills with real-world consequences, they just won't. It's heartbreaking to see as someone who was once sitting at the exact same intern desks as they are. Next story. I'm a high school math teacher. This comment will probably be buried under all the not a teacher comments, but anyway. When solving anything with call and response, me, and what is X times blank? Or what is 0 times blank? Class is crickets. I say, you all have calculators. In class, 4 kids maybe pick up the calculator, ask again what I want to know from them, and plug it in. The rest exist in their mental voids. They struggle to pass algebra because they don't have their multiplication tables memorized. They don't know number families. They need to legitimately work hard at GCF/LCM. They can't mentally add and subtract numbers. They can't even fathom long division. Half their parents don't see the value in an education. The other half are too busy on their phones and social media to be any sort of a role model. Granted, I teach outside of a major city on the East Coast in a very transient neighborhood. Students come from multiple rundown areas to live in ours briefly. The amount of halfway houses in my district is actually insane. The amount of students I teach who have witnessed a drug overdose or lost a close family friend to drugs is too damn high. On the other hand, I tutor a 6th grader weekly in a suburb closer to where I live, and she gives me so much hope for society. She has a drive to learn, love loves long division, can reduce fractions mentally, and all the things my high schoolers mentally quit over. She struggles with spelling and reading, but has made huge strides over the past 2 years and is ahead, again, of many of my high school students. Parents need to step up. Don't buy them phones or tablets. Read with them. Encourage them to spend large amounts of time outdoors playing. Study and practice mental math with them, or guaranteed they're gonna be dumber than you. Next story. High school teacher here. Yes, students failing a class is by no means uncommon. It happens, and there are supports to help with that. Students should not be failing because they lack the fundamental skills necessary to survive high school. What I mean by that is they are failing classes because they cannot read or write, full stop. Some of the questions I have had alone just this year. What does reverse mean? I've never seen that word. I want to help clean up algae in the ocean. This is an example of hyperbole. Other issues include students who cannot add basic fractions in high school, students who don't know how to take a note. I mean, they literally have nothing in their bag, and when I'm teaching, they will sit there staring at me as if this knowledge will just absorb into them via osmosis. Students who are genuinely shocked that I do not allow repeats for assignments I already cannot give deadlines for, in that they will hand in crap to me, I give them the failing grade, and then they go, "So, can I do it again?" Students take 2 weeks to write a paragraph in grade 11 and 12. These are not outliers either. This is the majority. Students handing in dog crap and asking if I think they will do well on it. I'm genuinely serious in that they're handing in sketches to me that have none of my checklisted items on it. I give them a literal checklist to check off their work, and they will still not do it. I have grade 9 students who are using their fingers to read my assignments. I have kids who would struggle reading even half of this, and most would not even read up to this point. So, when I see a question of, is this crisis real and how bad is it? Yes, it is real. Yes, it is bad. Boomers often joked about how millennials and the next generation would be screwed because we don't know how to do anything. I have kids that take 3 days to tighten 2 bolts in auto class. Another teacher had to ban 2 of his classes from his actual auto shop because they could not pass the safety test. Why? Because they literally couldn't understand the question. We are so colossally screwed in the next 20 years, I can't even joke about it. Parents, please freaking reinforce with your kids to read and write and do basic math. My job as a teacher is to teach. Your job is to reinforce what we do at school through homework and modeling. Next story. When I got my licensure in 2012 and was doing student teaching, it kind of rocked my world. We were going to be the first graduating class to teach Common Core in our area, and schools were transitioning. When I was student teaching, the veteran teacher, who was senior English, cried after class because so many of her kids were not at the level they should be at, but she was the end of the line. It's a lot of pressure on her to either play by the rules or fail the student. But then money gets involved. Schools get a lot of their funding from test results. Teachers' tenure can sometimes depend on if they're maintaining a school's level of success. So years and years of this snowballing, you have people passing kids along from 2nd grade to 12th grade when they never hit certain benchmarks, because teachers are afraid of losing their job, and schools are afraid to lose their funding. Isn't it super backwards that doing worse on test results gets you less funding? Like, how is it not super obvious that that will make test results worse? What a surprise when you can't buy resources and afford enough, staff or textbooks or whatever, that test scores will go down. That's crazy, dude. It's like, oh, you're struggling? Let's see how you do when you struggle harder. Next story. I adopted an abused 12-year-old in January. He literally can barely read, doesn't know how many days, weeks, or months there are, didn't know his birth date, doesn't know if 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 are bigger. We're having to start over with teaching him anything because he's just so incredibly far behind. He's struggling with 2nd grade schoolwork. However, my youngest is only a few years older than him and has an expansive vocabulary and straight A's, reading at a college level, etc. I don't think it's Gen Alpha that's the problem specifically, but more so the parents of a lot of these kids and not teaching or reinforcing any of these things. My son's biological parent just failed him in every way possible. Alright, hold on. Let's make it super clear here. An abused child is a special case here. I think he exists outside of the realm that we're looking at. it doesn't really come as a surprise to me that a child who was abused and then later adopted by you, thank you, by the way, fantastic, is going to be behind in school. Anyway, moving on. Next story. I've just finished my 25th year of teaching. I'm in elementary. The difference in what my first graders when I started and my second graders now is shocking. The attention spans, the abilities are lower, and the attitudes are higher. They are emotionally dysregulated and have learned helplessness. Something has got to change. Maybe parents should be given literature that includes warnings about social media and screen times, as well as advice about how to actually parent, because I see a lot of failure in that department. I've only got 4 more years until I retire, and I'm just hoping I make it through sane. I spent a good chunk of my time managing behavior rather than teaching content. Next story. I had to rework a unit in which the whole path of the lesson was geared towards them eventually writing a review of their favorite book, after chatting about their favorite book and doing a reading activity about someone else's favorite book. Problem was, they couldn't even get past the chatting stage. They didn't know any books. So I switched it to films. They didn't even know any films. All they knew was TikTokers and YouTubers. At least they knew Doraemon and a handful of cartoons, so I made it write about the best TV program you've ever seen. One of them started his essay with, quote, "The best program I've ever seen is news." Next story. Not a teacher, but had an encounter with a fast food worker that appeared to be Gen Alpha based on how things went down. Your total is $23.80. I paid $25.80 in cash and change. Gen Alpha takes the money, throws it into the register, then stares at me. I stare back. He looks down at the register, eyes widened, looks around the store. Can I get... Gen Alpha pulls coworker to register, points to register, and whispers to coworker. Coworker shrugs and walks away. Gen Alpha says, "You underpaid by half." Manager shoots forward to the register. Manager, what seems to be the problem? She paid half of the total. Manager looks at the register. Did you tell her the total? Gen Alpha nods. And she gave you like $10? Gen Alpha shakes their head. Then what's the problem? Gen Alpha points to the register. Manager, how much did she give you? It was like $20. I typed it over here. Manager, so she paid that and needs change then. Gen Alpha is tearing up and shrugs. Manager, oh my god. I'm so sorry. Here's your $2 and your food. Have a great day. I should have only been irritated by this situation, but I'm genuinely worried for the younger generation. Like, this was fast food and the kid was struggling so much. How are you going to make it when you're older? Next story. I'm not a teacher, but I can tell you this. When I took my kid to kindergarten orientation in April, the staff was very pleasantly surprised that he could read and spell basic words. He also knew how to spell and write his own name, or write at all, and knew his alphabet, numbers, shapes, and colors. One of the teachers we met told me that a good chunk of the kids start kindergarten unable to do most of these things. The school offers an optional free 2-week program now during summer where kindergartners can go for half days to introduce these skills to them before the school year starts in August. Hey, I gotta say, great solution. I'm surprised they can do it for free. That's awesome. The solution shouldn't need to exist, but that is really cool of the school. Middle school special education teacher with 22 years of experience. Like everything. I feel like it makes sensational headlines, but it skews the narrative. There are a lot of kids who lack critical thinking skills. There are a lot of kids who cannot read fluently or comprehend what they read. They haven't memorized basic times tables and need their phones to add and subtract. But the data holding up the crisis is flawed. First of all, screw Pearson. They are the evilest of companies and take most of the education funding. They have a virtual monopoly on state testing, and wouldn't you know, they will give you curriculum tailored to the test. If 50% of the students get a question right on their state test, that question gets dumped for being too easy. They cram so many convoluted steps into most problems to assess as many standards as they can, but they're way too complex for your average child. Secondly, there's a failure on the parents' end. In my experience, 1/3 of parents are overbearing, 1/3 are negligent, and 1/3 are actually helping their children grow properly. Society at large and social media are also failing our kids. The US government, I don't even want to get into how they're screwing over our kids, and the same for the addictive nature of social media. I don't think it's hopeless, but there needs to be some systemic changes if we want our kids to succeed. Next story. Not a teacher, but I work retail with mostly Gen Z coworkers. Many of the younger ones, girls, 19 to 22, can barely write legible digits, and I can't tell if they wrote a 6, 9, or 0. The boys, we said, had messy boy writing when I was in high school 20 years ago, and they had better handwriting than most of the girls do now. And the boys' writing all look like 6-year-olds. They literally physically can't write neatly. It's a combination of not learning cursive at all and doing everything on computers now. They don't build the fine motor skills needed to be able to write when they're kids because they were given tablets at preschool age instead of Play-Doh and finger paints. Okay, my writing also super sucks. And hey, I can confidently say it is because I was given a computer at a really young age. Turns out, typing from the age of 3 has its benefits and its drawbacks. Next story. I'm a math teacher. One issue I see is that students are being ramrodded through advanced courses they're not ready for, simply because their parents insist, and that's what's normal in society right now. They essentially learn the bare minimum to pass along, then take the next class in line with only a tenuous grasp on the previous one, all while barely understanding why they're doing what they're doing. They have no desire to understand the why behind what they're doing, only the how to get to the next course. They have essentially no ability to work through difficult problems on their own and struggle to come up with creative solutions because they have no idea what they're doing. You can't teach them anything that requires hard work or memorization, such as multiplication tables, because that's too stressful. Half of my advanced algebra students have to use a calculator to do basic arithmetic. I watch kids multiply numbers times 1, like 9 times 1, on calculators all the time. They don't even want to use calculators anymore because they'd rather just ask Siri. I think these deficits probably started during COVID and snowballed into what they are now. We'll see in a couple of years when we start getting non-COVID kiddos. Next story. Well, parents now have a lot of stuff to contend with. I was the single mom of 3 with a corporate job, and all my kids are big readers, and 2 of them have advanced degrees. Why? Well, because I made sure they all read. They had books. I read to them, we read together. I spent a fortune on Scholastic book sales. I had a trick for getting them to bed. Well, you don't have to go to sleep. You can lie down and read, but you have to get in bed now. There's no doubt that the educational system these days leaves a lot to be desired, but it wasn't that great really when my kids were in school either. Next story. My girlfriend is a 3rd grade teacher. Short answer, yes and no. I hear all about her days and her students. Some of them are very good. Some of them are far behind the level they should be. To me, it seems less like there's a crisis and more like there's a lot more volatility among the abilities of students. The way children are raised nowadays varies a lot from parent to parent. One of the biggest complaints my girlfriend has is that many parents expect her as a teacher to raise their kid for them. That means that some kids just come in without any concept of principles, discipline, or attention span. That's stuff that just can't be taught by one person to 20 plus kids within 8 hours. So the main issue, from what I can tell, is that the parents misunderstand what their job actually is. So to me, I think it's less that there's a literacy crisis among children, and more that there's a reading comprehension and critical thinking crisis among adults in their 30s and 40s. I think arriving at that conclusion could explain a lot about some current events going on. Next story. Yes, it is. I'm a Brazilian history teacher. I teach children from 11 to 15 years old. I'm relatively new in my job, been doing it formally for 3 years now, but the decline is visible. I still remember how I and my peers and the private tutoring I used to do were as students, our complaints and whining about having to copy from the whiteboard and do 5 pages of homework. Now the kids don't want to write a single sentence or do discursive/open response questions, which in my time were the preferred ones because we could write at least what we remembered and try to get a point. In regards to my subject, they are severely misinformed despite having the internet at the tip of their fingers. And I'm talking about kids with enough monetary power to be informed about basic things like what's before Christ and after Christ on the timeline of our calendar. And also, the amount of fake news and lack of willingness to fact check makes my job even harder because they're so uninterested in learning how to research properly to do projects, it is baffling. It's just sad. Next story. It's because tablets and apps have flooded education. Public education. Public schools read on tablets, write on tablets, take tests on tablets, be graded on tablets. Private schools have required book reading, screen time limits, handwritten essays, paper and pencil tests, and their teachers still grade their work. The wealth-hoarding class want the working class to be as uneducated as possible. They want people trapped in poverty so they can exploit them. Sam Altman actually said their goal is to make information a resource that they can sell to us in packets. Parents are going to have to really step it up to get tech out of their kids' schools and supplement their kids' education in the meantime. Start a book club with your kid. Read the same book and discuss it. The plot, the characters, the themes, the lesson, the emotional pieces, what they learned while reading it about the themselves or the world. Have them keep a journal so they practice their writing, or write short stories together, or have them write letters and mail them via USPS and teach them about the importance of the mail service and how it's being threatened. Not lecturing, just providing ideas that any parent or caregiver could access regardless of income. Next story. Yes, it's not all kids, but a sizable number of them don't read directions, and I realized it's because they either can't or they can read words but don't fully process or comprehend what they're asked to do. Sometimes I put a worked example at the top of a worksheet with example in bold so they can see what I'm expecting in terms of showing work. Some don't understand that they don't have to do that one. They get confused and say things like, "What do I do? This one's already completed." Edit. Another one I remembered. One time I had notes/directions at the top and put a horizontal line across the width of the page to separate them from the questions. Some students were confused and asked what to write on the line. They thought it was a line to put an answer on. Next story. The thing that scares me is their complete lack of background knowledge. Before my unit on government, I quizzed my 4th grade students. I asked them to name their city, state, and country. Only 5 of my 45 students got all 3 questions correct, and they all sat at the same table. Ask them basic information about any topic, and more than half have literally never heard about what you're talking about. At open house last year, I asked my parents to make sure that their kids knew how to spell their full name, their birthdays, and their parents' first and last names. I had 10-year-olds sitting in my class this year that did not know that information. No one is actually teaching them any sort of information that needs to be retained. All of the passages that they get tested on are just small excerpts that they can consistently choose not to refer back to. There's no more learning for the sake of learning. Next story. I'm a pre-K teacher, so I don't have the knowledge of the older kids, but I can give you a look into the younger ones. Developmentally and intellectually, they're either in the realm of advanced/almost advanced, or they're moderately delayed in multiple aspects. When talking about neurotypical children only, with only a few in the middle. From what I'm seeing, the result of that is how much effort the parents are putting in. You can say it's a tale as old as time, but it's worsened after the pandemic. Many parents were affected by the lockdown, one way or another. They are very young moms and dads. Either they go the extreme mile to nurture their children's brains since they feel they couldn't enough during COVID, or they've thrown in the towel long ago. For those kids, pre-K is the first time they've sung their ABCs. It's a shame that not only the older kids are still affected by their time in lockdown, it's causing a new generation now to suffer. Next story. My wife was a reading teacher for grades 2 and 3 for 10 years. Our district had the curriculum, all subjects centered around reading. Even math was heavy on word problems. Then right around the time Gen Alpha enters the system, 2 things changed. MAGA and devices. Parents used to take kids to the library or buy books for them. That stopped. MAGA went on the attack against education and wokeness and destroyed reading in schools. Because our district kept getting sued, they finally told all teachers to remove all books from the classroom, and the library was gutted to a small approved list of books that were MAGA-proof. Now, while I do agree that there are certain political leanings that would cause issues or butt heads with education, which is a sad statement, admittedly, I also think we should recognize that bad education is a bipartisan issue. I'm sure if you ask any senator of any party if they care about children's education, just that basic statement, they would say yes. How they want to get there is different, very different in some cases, but I think being so divisive about it is actually going to make it harder to get stuff done, just because it drives the people who are opposed to your way of thinking further away from you. It will make them try to actively oppose what you are suggesting because they just don't like you and you actively oppose a lot of what they're doing. Anyway, while I do agree with the sentiment that the whole, I don't want to get into it too much, but censorship is a huge issue, especially around books. I think that pointing fingers and calling it a MAGA problem does not help us get closer to a solution, unfortunately. Maybe that's a hot take. Maybe I'm being weird here. Next story. I'm a Gen X manager. I don't mind teaching someone how to do something. The problem that I see is this. Me. I need this by 3 p.m. today. Please start this now. It has priority. Young person. No problem. 2:30 rolls around. Me. I need the XYZ. Please send it to me now. Young person. I don't have it. I didn't know how to do it. Well, why didn't you ask someone or tell me you didn't know how to do it? Well, this other thing was waiting to be done, so I did that. Hey, and I made a spreadsheet. Me, trying not to have a stroke. Okay, this is a problem. Let's sit down in the morning and discuss this. If it's a one-off, I'm willing to forgive, but We will have a discussion about why it's a problem. The next time is a PIP. Next story. Middle school English teacher. It is bad. We read one novel a year. Students hardly read independently or out loud anymore. We play audio for them to follow along to. Students have no stamina, and it is depressing. The same goes for writing. No stamina. It should not take a week of class time to write 5 paragraphs. However, it does. If I graded exactly by the rubric, even some of my better students would do poorly. It takes more effort for me to write notes for improvement that they don't even read than some students put effort into their essays. That is assuming they don't use AI. Next story. Man, it's not just the kids. I work in retail and I see huge grown adults acting like they don't know how to read. We have self-checkout. There are huge signs saying as such. Most customers will stand in front of the registers not knowing what to do, and I have to walk them through the steps. Then sometimes they'll say that they didn't know it was self-checkout. This is literally every day. I'm surprised these people can dress themselves in the morning. If my job didn't pay well, I would be a lot meaner to them. This isn't the only daily issue, by the way. I know this was a question for teachers, but I needed that weight off my chest. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Next story. Teacher here. The problem isn't just illiteracy or written communication. They have trouble with verbal communication. I'm not exaggerating when I say it takes 10 to 20 questions to get basic information like, who are you and why are you at my door, out of them. They don't have the motor skills you'd expect them to have. I teach music, and getting kids started on instruments is harder than it used to be. My art colleague had to teach 8th graders how to use scissors. They don't know their own addresses or phone numbers or the phone numbers of any of the adults in their lives. Most importantly, they lack the initiative and critical thinking to solve problems on their own. This isn't every kid, but it is a large number of them. We're also starting to see this in some of our young colleagues in their early 20s, which does not bode well for the future of our society. This can be remedied on an individual campus if everybody is philosophically aligned and willing to put up with the adjustment period, but the adjustment period is rough. Kids who have been conditioned not to think or solve problems will resist it pretty hard at first, and you'll be tempted to rescue them a million times. The reason they're the way they are is because adults keep rescuing them. Don't give in. Next story. Librarian and tutor here. Math. Computer-driven math curricula is an abject failure. Stop teaching math and having kids do math via computer. It doesn't work, it doesn't stick, and kids simply cannot learn this way. Most of the digital curricula for math instruction is trash, and the people creating this garbage should be held responsible for the abysmal status of math instruction today. Stop teaching young kids number theory. Drill them on basic arithmetic and have them memorize their math tables. Memorize, not compute. Young children can memorize anything. Have them memorize all their basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Flashcards, flashcards, flashcards. I have high school kids still trying to compute 8 times 7. It's an absolute tragedy. You can't pass an ACT or SAT test trying to calculate this. It has to be automatic, and memorization is how you get there. You can teach them why it works afterward. Give them the number theory after they know that 8 times 7 is 56. And for God's sakes, do not give them 3 and 4 different ways to calculate answers, because they won't end up using any of them well, and every calculation step adds a point of failure. Reading. Saw this elsewhere, and it is on point. Too many children are being handed unchallenging books, even by teachers. They are books that underserve the students because they're beneath the reader's reading and developmental levels. Kids need thrilling books that push their comprehension forward. A 4th grader should not be reading Dr. Seuss, but Roald Dahl. A 5th or 6th grader should be reading something like Brian Jacques' Redwall series, or the adventure books of Jack London. A 7th grader should be reading something like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, The Wizard of Earthsea, or even Never Let Me Go if they can handle the themes. These are more challenging works, and kids will rise to them, but too often they're handed books that are way under their capabilities. Young readers who are struggling to read need more poetry. Shel Silverstein's poetry books, A Light in the Attic, Where the Sidewalk Ends, etc., are outstanding for working with students in elementary school who are struggling with reading, especially when a parent and student work together through those books. Also, the short-form poems allow you to read as many as you want without having to pick up mid-story. The poem treasuries compiled by Jack Prelutsky are also excellent. Now, this might be me truly being Gen Z here, but I hate flashcards. Never found them super useful. I was always told to do them, and whenever I could, I just didn't. It's just not the way that I learned things. I learned things way better by putting them into practice, not by having flashcards. And I'm not sure on their point about memorizing mathematics either. I think number theory is really good, but they also raise an interesting point. Children's minds are very capable of just knowing things. Like memorizing the really basic stuff probably doesn't hurt. It's probably worth it because the really smart kids there will be able to deduce things from looking at the patterns that they see in these tables of memorization. And then those who don't, you teach them later. So maybe OP's onto something there, although I didn't initially agree with them. Next story. Non-iPad babies/parents. Sound off. Did the school teach your child the basics of reading? No, you did at home. Did the school teach your child the basics of math? No, you did at home. Did the school teach your child the basics of behaving yourself? No, you did at home. Did the school teach your child the basics of communication? No, you did at home. Well, the reason your kids are falling behind is because we need to cater to every other failure and dumb F donor that decided raising a child was strictly the domain of public education rather than their damn selves. Never mind every kid bored out of their freaking skull because they're waiting for Cletus and Charity to learn phonemes for the 6th time this week. Never mind every dumb idiot that voted for things that made us operate at the lowest per student funding in living memory. The babies can't read, they can't decode, they can't think for themselves, they can't research, they can't decide what to think for themselves. They rely on AI to tell them everything. They're puppets. They're barely human because most of you idiots decided your duty as parents stopped at feeding the idiot you popped out and named. Next story. Former high school English teacher from 2019 to 2021. I quit because of COVID and a lot of the policies that contributed to this crisis. I had 9th and 10th graders who couldn't read at a middle school grade level. On top of that, they were expected to have comprehension of what they were reading. So many of them just got pushed through to the next grade to keep graduation numbers up. The pandemic made everything worse because they all got a free pass for the year. The fact that all of these students are now out in the world as adults makes me worried. I think a lot of this has contributed to the overall lack of media literacy I tend to see online. The inability to read and make sense of what they can read, I believe, creates a lack of curiosity, so they don't look anything up on their own and instead get ChatGPT or some other LLM to explain it to them. On the bright side, I do see a lot more young people gravitating towards books and doing research on topics that interest them because some of their peers avoid them. That youthful desire to be different is making them smarter. Time will tell, but I think those who want to learn will improve themselves. They shouldn't have to, and the education system shouldn't be a quota-based system and instead a vehicle to make well-educated and informed citizens, but I'm hopeful that we can work towards real education reform in the future. Next story. My daughter's 2.5 years old. We go to multiple playgrounds with different backgrounds, from the poor to the middle upper class. It's all the same. Almost every kid is nonverbal until they're like 5 years old. I'm the only father that plays with their child. All the other parents are on their phones or not focusing on the kid at all. Either the parents are too absorbed with technology or they just don't care about their kids. I'm not perfect. I let my daughter watch cartoons for 30 minutes to an hour a day because I have chores and things I need to get done in the house or I feel like I'm going to blow my brains out, and I don't have anyone helping me in my family. So sometimes I need a minute to breathe so I don't snap. I curate what she watches so she doesn't have access to anything and make sure she watches something that has something to do with the alphabet or shapes, colors, numbers, whatever. I'll explain what she's watching sometimes, but I'm always next to her if anything inappropriate comes out or I'm merely changing it, and I explain why it's inappropriate and then turn it off. Either way, she started speaking before she was 2 years old, and it amazes me that most kids older than her can't even put 3 words together in a sentence, and here she is talking about everything under the sun. It really makes me sad when we go to the playground because I end up being the father to a bunch of random kids while their parents literally don't care about them. If my daughter was talking to an adult, I would want to know what's going on. And here I am playing with all these random kids and their parents don't even bother asking who I am. Next story. Slightly different experience, but I teach juniors and seniors in college. Most are Gen Z and just a year or two younger than myself. While it's certainly not all of them, the literacy crisis definitely started before Gen Alpha. In my class, we have 2 major writing assignments that are meant to teach them how to make a publication-ready manuscript in our field, animal physiology. I went out of my way to break down every single requirement, how to do the data analysis, what buttons to push to format everything, and how to integrate citations. I was absolutely flabbergasted at how many students simply disregarded my instructions and turned in a barely coherent pile of garbage. What bothered me the most was that they had so much entitlement when I gave them the grade they deserved, and really, I was being generous. They had the audacity to confront me about it. One girl reported me to the dean for giving her a 50 despite her introduction being a single paragraph with 0 citations. She didn't even have graphs in her results section. Another student wrote about an entirely different species than what we had ever worked with. It makes me nervous about our next generation of scientists. Next story. I teach high school science. It is primarily a U-shaped curve. I'm seeing some of the best students I've ever had who ask questions that push me as an educator to understand my subject matter better and be able to apply it richly to everyday events. These kids use technology amazingly and are using AI to generate practice questions and check their own understanding and creating their own study tools. They are very actively engaged learners. They do lots of practice questions and get hard questions wrong until they get them right. On the flip side, I see students that really struggle to decode text, prompts, graphs, and answer the specific question. I spend a lot of time in my class giving students time to specifically read instructions and prove they understand what I am asking for. I teach primarily AP classes, admittedly, but the push to measure schools by participation in AP means I have more students in my class that really struggle than ever before. They use many methods to cope, but careful pre-testing helps identify issues so I can address skill gaps. I spend a lot of time teaching reading strategies, graphs, and long passages, as well as writing strategies to the kids that struggle the most. You embed them into as many lessons as possible and force kids to prove their understanding on paper. It is a crap load of work that some people just don't have the time for. I'm lucky enough to have an excellent team that I can bounce ideas off of. The biggest thing my students have to be taught is that they must fail and screw things up to learn long term. The more you struggle and keep trying, the more you pay attention and the stronger the connections in your brain. They hate this because it's such a foreign concept to them. Few kids have been allowed to fail, even at a small scale. Hell, attention in general is a huge struggle for kids. That is the biggest barrier to the strugglers getting better. As they get more comfortable with this, they learn better, and we address the underlying issue all of us educators are talking about in this thread. It makes sense that for AP classes, you would get way better of a top end of the curve, because a lot of those kids are there because they want to be, because they want to know more about, what was this, physics? Just high school science. I'm going to say physics. It's easier for my brain. But having kids interested in advanced level stuff is going to obviously give you kids who work really hard at it, and that's awesome. But I am very worried about the other side of that you, as we've learned all throughout this thread. The kids who struggle to understand anything, really, who are there to lightly hold on to the information that you pass them, and then they pass it back whenever it's time to write a paper and see what they actually held on to. What it comes down to is, I want to see kids do well and be happy, and obviously, standardized testing has humongous flaws. I feel like that's something that wasn't really addressed in this thread. Testing in general sucks. There are some kids that will just not do well with it and need more hands-on stuff. But what we're also learning in this thread is that the hands-on stuff is getting way less popular because kids are just, I hate to say it, lazy. It's so easy to be lazy nowadays. So I don't even blame them, to be honest. Parents have to keep their kids in check. If a kid is on an iPad for 5 hours a day from the time they're 2 years old, yeah, dude, they're not going to want to do school. They're going to watch Coco Melon or whatever. That's probably so outdated for kids stuff. I have no idea what kids are watching on YouTube now. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I will see you in the next one.